Fellow citizens of Africa and beyond, we gather in this moment of profound historical significance to bear witness to a tempest brewing on our great continent. For decades, Kenya stood as a beacon of democratic aspiration, a shining example of stability and progress in the heart of East Africa. It was a nation that, despite the complexities of its diverse ethnic tapestry, emerged as a hub of economic and cultural dynamism. Yet today, the very foundations of that promise are being tested. A storm of unprecedented magnitude has gathered, fueled by a deep and pervasive sense of disillusionment. This is not merely a political story, it is a human tragedy, a call to conscience that echoes far beyond its borders. Before we delve into the heart of this unfolding crisis, if you are a citizen of this world who believes in justice and the power of truth, please take a moment to subscribe, like, and comment to amplify these voices. Your engagement is the very fuel that ensures these stories are not silenced. The spark that ignited this fire was an unjust burden. The government, led by President William Ruto, introduced the Finance Bill of 2024, a series of aggressive tax hikes on the most essential commodities, bread, mobile money transfers, and other necessities that form the very fabric of daily life for ordinary Kenyans. For a president who had campaigned on a platform of championing the hustler nation, promising to uplift the poor and fight corruption, this bill was not merely a policy decision, it was a profound betrayal. It was seen by millions as a government turning its back on the very people who had put it in power, prioritizing elite interests over the public good. This betrayal, however, was not the sole cause of the unrest, but rather the final trigger. It awakened a generation that had long been grappling with systemic issues. The voices that filled Kenya's streets were not just protesting a tax bill, they were demanding an end to systemic corruption, railing against economic stagnation, and speaking out against the suffocating reality of a youth unemployment rate that stands at over 35%. This new generation of activists is educated, connected through the digital bloodstream of social media, and uncompromising in its demands for change. They are the youth, the disenfranchised, and the disillusioned, and their cry is not for temporary concessions, but for a complete overhaul of a broken system. The government's initial response was a stark demonstration of a growing chasm between the governed and their leaders. Instead of engaging in dialogue, of listening to the legitimate grievances of its people, the administration was perceived as tone-deaf. The initial peaceful demonstrations were not met with understanding, but with the early signs of confrontation. The stage was set. The storm, which began as a whisper of discontent, was gathering strength, its thunder promising to shake the very foundations of the Kenyan state and send tremors across the African continent. This chapter ends with the beginning of the escalation, a foreshadowing of the tragic loss of life and the immense pain that was yet to come.
As the storm of discontent gathered, so too did the darkness of the government's response. The promise of a democratic aspiration, a beacon of progress, began to flicker and fade, replaced by the grim reality of state-sponsored violence. What began as peaceful demonstrations, a collective plea for dignity and justice, was met not with dialogue, but with the deafening roar of live ammunition, the acrid sting of tear gas, and the indiscriminate force of water cannons. The streets of Nairobi and other cities, once vibrant with the promise of a better future, were now stained with the blood of its citizens. These were not mere statistics to be debated in halls of power. They were stories of lives cut short, of families shattered, and of a nation's trust betrayed. Among the fallen was a 12-year-old girl in Kiamu, a child in the safety of her own home, struck down by a stray bullet in an act of staggering cruelty. Her life, a symbol of Africa's future, was extinguished without reason, without justice. We also mourn Boniface Kadayuki, a 22-year-old mask vendor whose entrepreneurial spirit represented the dreams of countless young Kenyans. He was shot at point-blank range during a rally, his young life a casualty of a government's brutal indifference. And then there was Albert Ojwang, a blogger whose courageous voice was silenced in police custody. His autopsy, revealing head trauma and bruises, contradicted official claims of suicide, serving as a chilling testament to the lengths to which some would go to suppress dissent. These are the human faces of this crisis, and their stories compel us to demand accountability. The African Union, as the guardian of our continent's democratic ideals, has a moral and institutional obligation to act. The allegations of excessive force and extrajudicial killings demand scrutiny, and the world must not turn a blind eye. A most dangerous escalation, a direct order from President Ruto himself, instructed police to shoot protesters in the legs and break their legs to prevent property damage. This is not leadership, it is an act of dehumanization. It is a violation of human rights that sets a perilous precedent for the entire continent. A warning that the right to peaceful protest, enshrined in the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, is under threat. The sacred principles of the African Charter, Article 11 guaranteeing the right to assemble, and Article 4 protecting the right to life, are not abstract concepts. They are the very foundation upon which our collective future is built. When a government responds to peaceful demonstrations with such brutality, it undermines the very essence of what it means to be a leader. Such actions cannot be dismissed as internal matters. They are a stain on our collective conscience, a challenge to the values we have sworn to uphold as Africans. The silence of the continent is not an option, it is an accomplice. And so the world watches as a nation's trust is betrayed, and its future hangs in the balance, crying out for a Pan-Africanist to arise and demand justice. This is the moment for which the African Union was founded, to ensure that sovereignty is not a shield for impunity.
While the streets of Kenya were stained with the blood of its youth, a leader in Burkina Faso watched with a heavy heart. Ibrahim Traoré, committed to the principles of Pan-Africanism, found himself at a crossroads. He reflected on his own journey, a path fraught with security threats, economic hardship, and the weight of historical injustices. He had learned a fundamental truth. Leadership is not about silencing dissent, but about engaging with it. His own nation had chosen dialogue and inclusion, a stark and telling contrast to the path of confrontation and repression that Kenya's government was now walking. It was this personal perspective, rooted in the lived experience of rebuilding trust, that gave him the clarity and moral conviction to act. He understood the potential counterargument, the delicate dance of sovereignty, but to this he had a resolute answer. Sovereignty is not a shield for impunity. The very foundation of the African Union rests on the principle of collective responsibility, where the welfare of one nation's people is the concern of all. When a government's actions risk destabilizing a nation, when it tramples on the democratic aspirations of its youth, it is not merely a right, but a solemn duty for the AU to intervene, not to dictate, but to uphold the sacred standards we have set for ourselves. And so, with the weight of a continent's conscience on his shoulders, he stood before his peers. His voice, measured but firm, cut through the formal decorum, demanding that they face the grim reality of a crisis that was a stain on their collective honor. He called upon the AU to act, not with passive observation, but with decisive and transparent authority. He laid out a clear and unyielding blueprint for intervention, a joint mission comprised of independent experts and representatives from across the continent to conduct a swift, impartial, and conclusive investigation. This mission would scrutinize the use of lethal force, the circumstances surrounding abductions, and the extrajudicial killings that had gone unanswered for too long. The findings, he demanded, must be made public to ensure full accountability. His message was not without a powerful, direct plea. He looked past the political rhetoric and addressed President Ruto directly, saying, "Your people are not your enemies. They are the soul of Kenya, the dreamers and builders of its future. Listen to them, engage with them, abandon the rhetoric of violence, and embrace the path of reconciliation."
This was a final, desperate appeal to a shared humanity, a plea for a leader to remember his purpose. The chapter concludes with the powerful sense that the gauntlet has been thrown. The moment for which the AU was founded has arrived, and the continent is now watching, waiting to see if its leaders will rise to the occasion and prove that the values they espouse are not merely aspirations on paper, but a blueprint for courageous action. The burden of a nation's destiny and the future of Pan-Africanism now rests on their response.
With the gauntlet thrown, the continent held its breath. Traoré's impassioned plea for accountability had not fallen on deaf ears. It had ignited a new sense of urgency and obligation within the African Union. The focus now shifted from merely condemning the actions of one government to charting a path toward a more resilient and just future for all of Africa. The challenge was not just to investigate the past, but to lay a foundation for a new dawn, one where the rights of every citizen are protected and the promise of democracy is not merely an aspiration, but a lived reality. The core of this promise lay in recognizing that the protests in Kenya were not an isolated incident, but a microcosm of a larger struggle for an empowered and engaged youth across the continent. To heal the wounds and prevent a return to conflict, the AU's role had to evolve from an observer to a facilitator of meaningful change. The path forward lay not in repression, but in dialogue. Traoré's blueprint called for the AU to establish a permanent mechanism for engaging with these new youth-led movements. A youth advisory council, composed of representatives from across the continent, would ensure that the perspectives of this educated, connected, and uncompromising generation were not only heard but integrated into the decision-making processes of our continental body. This council would stand as a vital bridge, mediating between governments and protesters, and ensuring that the demands for systemic reform, not temporary concessions, are addressed with the gravity they deserve. The crisis also highlighted the urgent need for continental solidarity. The economic pressures fueling the protests, high debt, inflation, and staggering youth unemployment, are not unique to Kenya. They are challenges we face from Accra to Addis Ababa and from Dakar to Dar es Salaam. Traoré's call was a call for shared responsibility, urging the AU and regional economic communities to explore mechanisms of targeted support, such as debt relief initiatives and technical assistance for economic reforms. This would be a powerful demonstration that Africa stands together, not only in times of prosperity, but in moments of adversity. As the continent took the helm in resolving its own challenges, Traoré also extended a message of partnership to the international community. While international organizations like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch had documented the abuses, the responsibility to mediate and heal remained African. The AU, with its deep understanding of the cultural and historical context, was best positioned to lead. International partners were invited to support these efforts with expertise, funding, and a global amplification of Kenyan voices, but with the understanding that the African Union must be in the driver's seat. The time for action is now, not just for a single nation, but for an entire continent on the brink of a new era. To the people of Kenya, your courage is a beacon that has inspired us all. Your determination to fight for a better future is the fire that will forge a stronger Africa. Do not lose hope. Your struggle is our struggle, and the African Union will stand with you. To my fellow African leaders, let this crisis be a warning and a catalyst. Our youth are the heartbeat of our future, and to suppress them is to risk our continent's destiny. We must recommit to justice, equity, and a governance that serves all. May Africa rise. Thank you. And now, we invite you to be a part of this ongoing story. Share this message, comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to stay informed. Your engagement is crucial to ensuring that the voices of justice and accountability are heard far and wide.